1982, Harvard professors created something called the three circle model for family business. And that helped to identify all the areas of complexity that are within a family business. And that has stood the test of time.
Welcome to Tip Top Grow Up Your Business with Metronomics. Join me, Shannon Burns-Huskow, and Metronomics certified coach, Ged Roberts.
We'll be talking to business thought leaders, entrepreneurs, CEOs, and business team coaches who have all taken the journey to grow up their businesses to their tip top.
We'll be sharing strategies, systems, stories on how you can grow your company up at the speed you want.
If you're searching for your path to the tip top and feel your time is running out, then this podcast is for you. Welcome back to the Metronomics podcast, the podcast where we speak to coaches, thought leaders, and authors, people who have got something to say about how they help businesses grow. Today, I'm with Michael Palumbos. Michael, how are you?
I'm wonderful, Jed. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm looking forward to our chat today, something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about family business today.
It's near and dear to my heart, thanks to my father who pulled me into his business many, many years ago.
Okay, well, I work with some family businesses, but most of the companies that I work with are not family businesses. So I'm looking forward to this because it's going to give me an insight into the differences between family business and other businesses, because they are very, very different, aren't they?
Agreed.
Yep. Okay, so before we jump into family business, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me a little bit about your background. We're both Metronomics coaches, so maybe give us a bit about your coaching journey and how you became a coach. I'd love to hear the backstory.
Yeah, so a very traditional wealth advisor. I say traditional, we were comprehensive wealth advisors. So tax planning and estate planning and investments and business owner planning. And I started in the marketplace, cold calling business owners back in the day, 25 years ago, when you could actually get an owner to pick up the phone every now and again. And so we did a lot of, transition planning and succession planning, legacy work. So, as it would be called back then. And I loved it. I really loved it. And my father was the one who brought me into the business. He was, he started off as a planner in the 70s. And half of his business was business owners. The other half was executives around Kodak and Xerox, Eastman Kodak Company and Xerox and the like, in the Rochester, New York area. And I really, really loved the business owners that I worked with. And I ran into probably within the first 12 to 18 months, I started my practice 90 minutes away from my father. And I did that on purpose because I knew there's a possibility that Dad and I might not mesh perfectly. And though we,
so one of the challenges of family businesses.
Exactly. And, I had a lot of respect for Dad, ton of respect for Dad. There's no way I could have done what he did back in the 70s when he started his business. And I just looked at things a little differently. And every time we tried to work together, for whatever reason, it was the craziest thing. It just never really went smoothly. And we did have some, differences. I don't want to say disagreements, just differences about where we should go and how we should do things. And that led me to, in Syracuse, New York, there was a local chamber of commerce and they had a family business group. And I asked if I could join. At first they said, no way. You're a wealth advisor. You're just looking for trying to drum up business. And I'm like, no, I'm in business with my father. I want to talk about some of the stuff that's going on. And they were incredibly helpful. Was, as Dad and I would have conversations that, again, most of them work out. Most of them were great and wonderful, but it's the ones that don't, that you need that somebody who's been through it before. So I got lucky, found that group, and it was pretty cool and really helpful. Fast forward many years, Dad retires. I'm now working with his family businesses, some that he had been working with for 20, 30 years. And now I'm working with them. And we're going through transition with one of the families from generation 2 to generation 3. And they said to me, what fed 3 households, it ain't going to feed 6. at the same level of revenue. And I said, oh, you're right. You've got to grow so that there's more profits to be able to feed more households. Otherwise, they're not going to have the same level of lifestyle that you had growing up. And
Michael,
so,
can I jump in very,
yeah,
very quickly there? You just
of
said
course.
something that I read in a book just yesterday. And I think it's an incredible coincidence. I'm currently rereading Titan, the biography of John D. Rockefeller. And in his upbringing, he used exactly that sentence, what fed 3 households won't feed 6. That's it. That's exact quote is in his book. And it's incredible
That's
coincidence. Anyway, sorry, I apologize for interrupting. Please continue.
No, that's awesome. I have read that book, but not seen that quote in there. So now I got to go back and reread it again. Thank you. So I had read Vern Harnish's book, Scaling Up and Mastering the
Yep.
Rockefeller Habits, many years earlier for my own business, and said, look, to this family, I said, why don't we read Scaling Up together? None of them were readers. They did not want to, they did not really want to be doing this. So we did a Saturday book club that everybody had to read a chapter in the book or 2 chapters in the book. Then we would get together once a month on a Saturday for the morning and figure out how to implement that in their business. And so I kind of was like, 1/10 coach and 90% making sure that they just read the book and facilitator. The
Well, that's
one thing,
accountability, isn't it?
right? Well, and that's why they did it. Why they
Mhm.
did it. The one thing they took away was that they were hog tying their ability to hire A players. They had a family rule that said, no one shall be hired that makes more than than the lowest family member. And so it's like, wait a minute, what if the person you hired is worth more and doing more than a family member? You're kind of handcuffing yourself. And Generation 3, heard that loud and clear. And that was the only thing that they took away from all of the work that we did over the course of the year. But they violently executed looking for A players and building their teams out. That family went from $10 million of revenue when we started to doing over $55 million of revenue today.
Yeah, and we know that A players are the key. A players outperform B and C players by normally a factor of 5 to 10. And if you've actually got a rule in business that prevents you accidentally, because I'm sure the rule wasn't put in place to do that, accidentally prevents you
Right.
from hiring A players. Now, as you know, what's the term you used? Hog tied, was that the term you used?
Hog tied or handcuffed. Yeah, either way.
Yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
But That's a really good point, Jed. Oftentimes in family business, and I see it over and over again, is that there's an unintentional rule that causes the bottlenecks. That it's family driven, so there's good reason why we talked about it, but then we don't understand the consequences 3, 4, 5 years down the road.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the we've always done it like this. That's a phrase that probably raises the hackles in most of us coaches. As we talk to leadership teams. Because the rule was put in place for probably a perfectly valid reason at the time, and it then passes down through the generations, and no one questions why it was put in place in the first time. But credit to them. Once they realized that it was not appropriate anymore, they got rid of it. So credit to them.
Yeah, yeah. And in the midst, from the beginning of working with them through today, I realized that this coaching process is just fabulous. And the better I could get at coaching, the more value I could bring to our clients. That's where that came from. And I found Metronomics along the way as just a platform for me that just made an awful lot of sense, because it wasn't just, Metronomics, or it was Metronomics, and Shannon and all the other coaches just brought the best of the best, who the thought leaders were, whether it was Jim Collins or Patrick Lencioni. Here's our system, but let's tag on where the thought leaders, because you can't be great at everything. And so
Yeah.
it's this wonderful amalgamation of powerful, powerful thought leaders.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Michael, a question from me. In my experience, I've personally found that family businesses are often less receptive to coaching, not necessarily because they're less receptive to coaching, but because they want everyone to agree on who the coach might be. So it goes around this circle of, well, I like him. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. No, there's often not one person who is in charge who can make that call. I'd love to hear your experience or your perspective on that.
Sure. You're not wrong. That is a common um, worry and a common issue for many family businesses, that they're trying to get 100% agreement. And I think one of the things that I bring to the table is Dad and I, my father, didn't always agree on everything. And so the way that we worked well together was, even though we were in the same office, we respected each other. He ran his business and I ran mine. We actually had two separate companies, even
Yeah.
though we were two doors down from each other. And then when he retired, he cut the strings and just, that's it. I'm out. I'm done. And that way he knew that he wouldn't be, pulled back into the business. It's a conversation. And the number one most important thing that I try to teach families, just like Metronomics, if the purpose and the vision are big enough and they align through the colander and they're sifted through the values, then the facts don't count. It doesn't matter whether you like this coach or don't like this coach. If that coach aligns with the purpose of where you're going and the vision of what you're trying to do and aligns with your values, then bring them in or her in and get moving on this. The
Yeah.
other
Okay.
thing that I think is really cool for family businesses, a lot of the family businesses I work with, they do cool things like construction or, manufacturing and whatnot. And a good one of my mentors and colleagues did a talk many, many years ago that he still does today. What can family businesses this isn't the name of it, but what can family businesses learn from the rock band Metallica? And Metallica back in the 90s did a documentary called Some Kind of Monster. And so he would walk through that documentary and show you clips of where Metallica was making emotionally intelligent decisions, more so than the people. They had a coach that they hired to help them get through some of the the dysfunction that the band had. They were bringing in a new band member. So there was a scene with an attorney in there, and the attorney's like, oh, we just want to do it this way. The attorney never asked the band what they wanted. They were just telling them what to do. And so it was just really a beautiful thing. And so what I just say to the family businesses are you cooler than Metallica? Because even they needed a coach.
Wow. I've never heard of that before. A rock band with a coach.
Yeah. They said if it wasn't for the coach, they would have gone the way of the Beatles.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a fascinating insight, and not one you'd actually connect with family businesses. So I had a good laugh at that. That was great. So you've worked with multi-generational businesses. What have you learned from that experience? What are the challenges dealing with that succession or the transition down through the generations? And it must be a tremendously complex area.
One of the things that I try to teach families is that we always need to give respect and pay homage to those who came before us. And so if you can go back 3, 4, 5, 6 generations and think back, where did my family come from? This moment in time when we're running this business today, we are so lucky to be here because of where did our family come from and what did they go through? Every family has gone through something. And so if we look back and pay homage to those who got us here, it makes it easier to start thinking about, okay, the decisions that we're making today, let's make sure that we think about what does it look like 3, 4, 5 generations from now. That's one of the things that I think helps guide families a little differently. It's just framing this moment in time is only important because of the luck that we got here. So we got to be careful about what we're thinking about today for those in the future.
How do you put a filter on those past experiences so that you don't bring in those rules that no longer apply, like never hiring someone that earns more than any of the other family members? Because that was a constraint that was passed down, wasn't it? So how do you put a filter on those rules, those questions, that history in effect?
Sure. Again, I would love to tell you that I created all of these things, but other mentors along the lines, spending a lot of time in classes and seminars, learning from, other people that are, been doing this before I even started. But one simple question really helps people. And I learned this from a guy named Jeff Savlov. And what he says is, what would be different if this wasn't a family business? And that
Hmm.
one
Hmm.
question helps to reframe all of those things. How would things be different today? How would you make this decision differently if this wasn't a family business?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that
yeah. I see that.
that really helps for a lot of people to filter.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, I get that. That makes sense. And I guess there's also an element of, this decision was made years ago because of this. If what would that decision be
Yes.
made would
Yes.
be now, bearing in mind the world has changed over 50 years. Yep.
You go back to what we said before, is what are the ramifications of the decisions that we're making today on future generations?
Yeah, 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 yeah. So a lot of people might think that's a crazy part of the world to build your business around, family businesses, because they're just hard, and people might run away from that. But you've run to it. Was there a defining moment where you thought, okay, this is where I work best? Because normally we often have this sort of, this golden moment where you think, I found my core customer. I found the customers that I'm going to work best with. Was there a defining moment for you?
A lot of my favorite defining moments were mistakes that I made. And then it's, ooh, how do I not do that again? Early in my career, I was dealing with a family. It was a family business. His father was in the business before him, but he didn't have anybody that was taking over the business from his kids. But he was a business owner. One of my first 5 to 10 clients. I don't remember, but it was early on in my career. And they had a family cottage, and he wanted his kids to keep it in the family. He wanted it in trust so that grandkids, future generations could come to the cottage. This has been the family's meeting place for years.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited. We found a great attorney. We put some great technical documents together. It was really a well laid out plan. Mom and dad passed. 6 months afterwards, that trust was dismantled and the cottage was sold.
Ah, okay.
So the big mistake was I never included the children and asked them, is that what you want? And so that you really, when you start to plan, it really helps to bring all the parties to the table when you're trying to do something for somebody else. You don't know whether that gift is, a real gift, or is it a meteor or a meteorite that's, coming at you. And so in this circumstance, we found out that the kids were like, mom and dad always took care of everything and did all of that stuff. And they made it really easy. And we don't want the stress of keeping that up together. And one of our siblings that lives out of state, they never even come in. Why are we going to tie up her money in it? Going
Mm.
forward, that level of complication was fun for me. And having those conversations after the fact was a defining moment for how I did things going forward, and trying to bring people to the table so that everybody was on the same page. As I said that out loud, that was the first time I've actually verbalized that, I think. But as I said that, I think that's what I love about Metronomics and the business coaching side, because it's not just the CEO. A Metronomics coach won't coach just the CEO.
That's
You've got
right.
to coach the CEO and the leadership team. And so you get both sides of the story of what's going on and how do we build this together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hmm. And that really takes me to the next question I had in mind, and that family businesses for me are sort of, really difficult to get everyone on the same page. I remember working with a family business. This is probably about 7, 8 years ago, and the CEO was one of the younger sons who had proved to be really, really smart. So they'd made the right call in elevating this young pup, because he was smart and because he probably had the skills to be able to do the job. But there were several family members that sort of had these notional roles along the side that rarely ever turned up to work and didn't really do much, but they were still expecting their views to count. And the conversation I had with the CEO was sort of like, well, you're in charge, you're the CEO. So you've got to take this company and you've got to take control and you've got to run with it with your vision. Now, obviously respecting the history and the legacy of the past. And he couldn't get past the notion that everyone in the family who was entitled to had a say in key decisions in the business. Now, this isn't going to work because you're now putting very, very big, important decisions in the hands of people who have actually shown that they're not that interested in being part of the business. And it's a really difficult problem.
Yeah, you just nailed on the head exactly. John Davis and Renato Tageri from Harvard University back in 1982 created something called the three circle model. And basically, it was a Venn diagram where it overlapped the family, the business, and the ownership. And what that pointed out was all of these areas of complication. And right in the center, you could have all of it. You could have a manager who didn't own anything, but was in charge of things. You could have owners that weren't in the business that just wanted dividends from the business, or they wanted, they wanted the profits from the business, and so many different layers of complication. One of the things that works has stood the test of time. And that's why we created the Family Business Flywheel. And so the flywheel is, again, a Venn diagram, but it overlaps a self-operating business, which you and I both would know it as a business that's run on the Metronomics platform, but it's that A-player leadership team. It's a culture of accountability, and it's the CEO focused on the CEO, things, culture and strategy. Then on the other side of that is the next bubble would be the family business, family office. And when we're looking over there, some of the things that you're looking at are just real simple. Come on. I want one coordinated plan for the wealth. Okay. I want advisor alignment, and I want somebody to oversee it. As we get successful, as we grow our wealth, it gets to the point where the family should not be the ones coordinating all this stuff. And they believe that they have to do everything. And so they really need the idea of a family office. They haven't had a liquidity event, so they don't have the money to do those things. And that's where a company like us comes in. The last part of that Venn diagram is the sustainable family legacy. And this is where I believe it's the cornerstone of all of these things. And that when you get this right, when the family sits down and says, what are our values? What's our vision? What's our purpose? How do we communicate? And how do we make sure that we stay connected? And how do we make decisions together? And then finally, that gives us the ability to lead together between generations. And when a family is doing those three things, it becomes a flywheel, because as the family gets stronger at trusting each other and communicating, that parlays right into the business. And as the business, gets stronger and communicates better and has more A players, and maybe it's not driven by just family pieces, that creates more wealth. And then the more wealth, I can invest more into my family. I can invest more into the business. And there's just this perpetual circle. Flywheel keeps spinning, and it gets easier and easier. It creates confidence, clarity, and continuity for the family when they're doing that.
Yeah, I see. Okay, that sounds like a really interesting model that works really well for family businesses. Why don't we explore each of those three loops in a bit more detail? Now, if you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you get notified of future episodes as they get released. Now, Michael, that model sounds really interesting. Can we dive into those three different loops in a bit more detail?
100%. So where this came from is, remember that first family that wasn't in alignment, that threw me for a loop. And I wasn't prepared for that. I read a book called Family Wealth, Keeping It in the Family by James E. Hughes Jr. He goes by J. Hughes. And that whole book was talking about the family and not talking about the business or the wealth or the technical side of putting all these pieces together. It really talked about family as its own asset class. And that resonated with me to the point that I reached out to Jay and said, could we talk? And he was the most gracious person. He's been a mentor for 15 plus years. And he said, halfway through our talk, he goes, I'm happy to continue this talk. We can have other conversations, but you must connect with John A. Warnick. And John A. is starting a group called the Purposeful Planning Institute. And I want you to help him out. And I want you to be a part of that group. So I did. So I've spent the last 15 years, as a member of the Purposeful Planning Institute, which all is about the family. What happens? What drives family members apart? What drives them together? How do we manage these emotions around wealth and the business? And in that was a defining moment for me. So I knew that, creating a sustainable family legacy and getting the family on one page is going to be the most important. That's the keystone piece. The problem for the last 15 years is I work in the middle market, family businesses. That's where we live, work, and breathe. And most of them aren't going to have a business coach and a wealth coach and a family dynamics coach. They don't have enough time for all of those things. And so I've always been looking for a way that we could deliver those services, even if the family was spread across the country. And we found a partner that they created something that they call FamTech, family technology. And it's a way to all of these conversations around values and purpose and what is our communication styles and what is our forgiveness styles and how do we make decisions together 30 minutes a month per person. And you do it separately. And then once everybody's done it, you can see it in the software. What did Ged say? What did Lisa say? What did Michael say? And now everybody can get together once or twice a year and now have a meeting around how do we bring this together and what does this all mean to us and how do we move forward? That sustainable family legacy, I think, is key for successful family businesses because that business is creating wealth. And that, like I said, the hard part was, how do you deliver this? The big coaches that are out there, my mentors, they're out there charging $100,000, $200,000 a year to work with families and they want to meet, 3, 4, 5, 6 times a year. I don't know if none of my clients were going to step up for that piece where using the tech they could. Very well, and your audience, I hope, knows about Metronomics. And so, myself and 3 other Metronomics coaches interviewed a whole bunch of businesses. When I looked at the data, 72 of them were family businesses. We just asked these business owners, what keeps you up at night? And that was where Glendale and John Ninkovich came up with we came up with the CEO Doom Loop.
Yep.
And it was, do I have the skill set? Does my team have the skill set? Do I have the right people? Do we have the right strategy? And all these questions around that kept the CEO as the bottleneck. And when you introduce Metronomics to a business owner, it starts to set them free. It's not all on the CEO to, put this together. Now they have to get the right players on the bus, but that self-operating business is something that every owner wants. And even if they're not trying to sell the business, it would be nice to take 3 months off and come back and the business is in a better spot than when I left.
For sure. And not many CEOs can do that.
Correct. So I think Metronomics gives them the ability to do that over time as they're building out that A-player team and really getting a good direction. On the third one, on the family business, family office, what happens and what I've seen through the years is that very often the wealth advisor gets paid on managing investments. That's where they make their money. But what I say is that's just table stakes. What value they bring has to be in the coordination between the legal side of things, the accounting side of the household, the business, and the wealth, and coordinating the personal and the business with all of these things. And so when you have a lack of coordination, you miss opportunities and there's always gaps. So my team, again, I think part of it is Dad was lucky. We were in this business that was the philosophy was serve first, last, and always. And that if you served and didn't sell, that you would be happier, the client would be happier, and it was just a win-win. So, we were taught how to read wills and trusts and those types of documents. We could tear apart a balance sheet and look for issues on the balance sheet and the profit and loss statement and the tax returns and the personal and corporate. I would always tell people that if your wealth advisor isn't asking in the initial meetings to look at your will and your trust, your tax return and your business documents, the odds are they're not going to be able to add any insights in those arenas. And now when you start to put all of those pieces together, watch this one. You're a business coach. You meet with your client. You put together this strategy and you create a BHAG, and you know that BHAG is going to triple the valuation of the business over the next 15 years. Wouldn't that be a good thing for the estate planning or for the wealth advisor to know so they can determine, do they want that wealth inside their estate or would they like that outside of their estate so they don't pay taxes on it? So it's just that by bringing it all together and coordinating it, I think it really is helpful.
Yeah. So you got these three loops within a bigger flywheel. Is there does each of these individual loops have their own primary lever? Is there one thing that drives momentum through each of those three loops individually?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And I think, it just boils down to like what we've been talking about all along. On the self-operating business, the number one loop is that A player leadership team. If
Okay.
you
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
that, if that's the only thing you got right, it's really going to be helpful.
Yeah. Well, if you get that bit right, the rest will just happen.
Right. Then
Mhm.
accountability starts to happen and the CEO gets freed up to do the things that they're supposed to be doing. And execution happens and cash flow happens. So yeah.
Mhm.
On the wealth side, I think the lever is the advisor alignment and one coordinated plan. And so what that means is, typically the attorney, the accountant, the wealth advisor, the business coach are all working in silos. And so you can't uncover gaps in our opportunities if you're in silos. So on at least an annual basis, if not twice a year, our team is pulling all of those people together and talking about, what are your plans? What are the objectives of the clients from your perspective? What are the objectives from your perspective? And then we use the client's objectives to become the filter for any planning processes that we might want to think about. Another good example of that is when a company transitions in a family business from generation to generation, that is a huge opportunity from a tax planning perspective. But you only get that opportunity once the paperwork is signed and it goes from generation 3 to generation 4, you're done. You can't go back. And so you have to utilize that opportunity to take advantage of all the tax rules that are available at the time that you're doing that planning.
Mhm. So you bring in this combination of of accounting and business coaching and wealth management and legal, all of those things that often other businesses don't need in the same way, but you bring it into the same model. That's pretty compelling.
Yeah. And I think that, our clients would tell you that's why we have 20, 30, 40-year relationships
Mm.
with the families that we serve. It's the key driver. I use this one. We talk about hiring A players, right? Steven is on my team, and Steven is an associate advisor, just finished year one with us. He happens to be the great grandson of one of my father's first business owner and clients. And they sold that business around on the time of COVID. And what he said to me was, well, you helped to sell my family's business, so I'm going to come and join your family's business because I know the type of work that you've been doing for our family. I want to go and do that for other families.
Right. Okay. Okay. So you're creating a legacy within a legacy. Now, Michael, one of the things that's often sort of been a question on my mind, and this relates as much to non-family business as it does to family business, but I think it's probably more extreme in family businesses, is how do you get disagreements or communication issues within family businesses resolved? Because often there's some, there's the balance of control is often very different in a family business, and they, they often want to take everyone's views into account. Do you have an approach to deal with that?
Yeah. So, Jed, that's a great question. And I think what I'd say is if you continue to focus on the issue, it's always going to be an issue. It's going to be really hard to unravel that. And so we take a step backwards and we want to focus on what is the vision? Why do we exist beyond money? Why, as a family, what matters to us? And if we were to look down 10, 15 years from now, what are we trying to accomplish? What matters? What is our vision for the future? And everybody should have a voice in what they believe the vision is. So we should have a personal vision, right? And if we help each family member define their vision of the future, what success looks like for them, sometimes just that conversation alone, somebody who was hell bent about stopping the momentum within the business looks up and says, the reason I'm trying to stop it is because my vision for the future is I always wanted to be a musician. And I've been spending all my time working in the family business, and the business has enough money. It has enough people leading it. It doesn't need me. I'm going to go and go down the route that I want to go to. Once everybody knows their individual vision and their own individual values, then we can apply them to the whole family. And what we're looking for is, where do we align? Where are we the same? What is the vision that matters for all of us? What are the values that we subscribe to? Let's use your family for an example. Okay. You grew up in one household, your wife in another household, right? I'm guessing that your values and your wife's values overlap in some reason, in some areas, and that's what drove you to get married.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No question. Yeah.
I'm going to also tell you that if you were to do a values exercise for yourself and your wife did a values exercise for herself, and then you overlap them, where the areas of disagreement happen are things that you value that she doesn't, and things that she values that you don't. That one little exercise can save marriages.
Yeah, absolutely. And those where it doesn't overlap is normally where the disagreements come in.
Yes. And so when we start to map that for families, all of a sudden light bulbs go off to say they're not a bad person. It's just that's what they value. And it just opens up a different level of conversation. And it takes, some emotional awareness. It takes some ability to step back, and everybody wants to fix the problem. And I can't work with, I don't do well with families that are stuck on fixing the problem. They need to be stuck on being the best that they possibly can be. And the way that we're always the best is to take a step back. There's no single business plan that you've ever done that started with fixing a problem.
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah.
Yep.
I see your method there. And I'm a big fan of the notion of disagree and commit. Once you know who has the accountability for a decision, you have the conversation, you have the discussion, you have the debate, but ultimately the person who is accountable for the decision makes the decision. And once it is made, even if you disagree, I want you to swing behind that decision.
Yes.
I've found that it's often harder to do that in a family business.
Yes. And I think it's, like I said, I think it's coaching and just talking about it. It's the families that can take that step back are, have a 10 times easier ability to do that. You just talked about, that the ability to disagree and commit. So I have said to several people that I would like to reach out to Patrick Lencioni and do the 5 dysfunctions of a family. But think about this from the family perspective. They get into business together because they trust one another. They know, like, and trust each other. They run into the problems because they don't have the ability to have healthy conflict.
Yeah.
And
yes.
so
Yes.
And so it's teaching them to go back and say, remember, you got into business because you trusted each other. Now we have to go back, and you're getting stuck in a conversation because you can't have this conflict. We need to be okay with healthy conflict, and we need to go back. It's just a skill set. And so we go back and we work on that skill set, no differently than when you do a 5 dysfunctions of a team, with the teams that you lead. If they get stuck, they have to understand where they're getting stuck, why they're getting stuck. And then we go into so after we have conflict, then we commit, right? I think in the family, it's the accountability needs to be, it is still there. It needs to be okay for every family member to be accountable to what they said they were going to do. And then the results, are just measured based on, is the family moving in that towards the vision that they encountered that they had mapped out for themselves.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. Michael, I had one last question. In the work that you do with families and family businesses, are there any, and I guess I'm asking this is this different family businesses and non-family businesses? What are the typical signs for when the family business is starting to struggle or starting to lose momentum?
Yeah.
Are there any indicators that are maybe different for family businesses?
So I think we've talked about them a few times, but it's that cognitive dissonance where we're starting to feel sometimes people are rubbing just because it's time. The business has run its course. The family's run its course. Oftentimes I tell people, the families, the best thing you can do is to sell the business. Everybody gets stuck in the word legacy, and they feel like, look at great grandpa Joe started this business 75, 100 years ago. I look like a big schmo if I let this thing go. And it's the exact opposite, is protect the wealth What if you don't, you might not have the next generation who's looking to come into the business.
Yeah.
That's if we're looking at individuals' visions, what if you don't have somebody whose vision is to come into the family business and hold that torch? That's probably the biggest one,
Yep.
is,
Yep.
do I have somebody in the family that wants to hold that torch and carry on the legacy? Can the family step aside and allow that legacy to grow and change? Go back to, it doesn't always have to be done the way that great grandpa did it. We might need to change the logo to keep up with the times. We might need to change who we are as a business. My father will say it all the time. He goes, I could never do what you did, what you're doing today. And I don't have any desire to build this big national business that serves all these family businesses. He goes, I like doing what I was doing. There's no way I could have he cold called all the time. I cold called a little bit. He cold called probably 100 people a day, and I was never near that level of doing it. He took more no's than I ever could have handled.
Yeah. Okay. That takes a particular character, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, so to the family business owners out there, what would be your one piece of advice for them in running their family business?
Yeah. I would say think Ted Lasso. Channel Ted Lasso and just be curious. Be curious about what the next generation is interested in. Be curious what, your brother or your sister or your father is saying. What's behind this? What's the motivation? The more curious you can be, like Ted Lasso said, be curious, because you might have found out that I was in a dart league for umpteen times. And, that if you remember that scene from Ted Lasso, it's just classic. I think that would be what I would be telling most family businesses. Be curious to learn more, be curious to, take on different coaches and see what's out there. That would be my number one takeaway.
Okay. Okay. And you've mentioned a few books as we've been talking. Is it worth just going through those? Because that's probably a good source of reference for other family business owners.
100%. Obviously, I love Three Head Way from Shannon. I love Metronomics. I think the M Game is a great, place to start if I want a self-operating business. If I'm looking at the Family Business Family Office, I would skip to Complete Family Wealth by Jay Hughes. I think that that's a really good spot to be. And that also leads into the sustainable family legacy side of things. Those two kind of fit together, but that Complete Family Wealth does a really great job on both of those pieces.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think that wraps it up for today, Michael. That's been a really interesting conversation. I've learned a lot about family businesses that I didn't know before, and I'm thinking maybe they're not as scary as I used to think they were. So maybe I will sort of focus more on family businesses, and if I do, then I know I've got a great counsel and coach to speak to if I've got any challenges there.
Jed, this has been a pleasure. I really appreciate you having me on today.
That's been a really good episode. Yeah. Thanks for your time, Michael. Thank you.
Have a great day.